Hello and welcome to another video podcast focusing on people working within the entertainment industry. My name is James and I'm a headshot photographer and videographer from Greater Manchester here in the UK. My guest today is Kaitlin Howard, an award-winning actress, musician, singer, fight choreographer, director and stage combat instructor. Kaitlin has 20 years experience working within the entertainment industry, performing many roles in film, television, theatre and radio. Kaitlin is one of only 3 women on the Equity Register of Fight Directors. As a fully qualified Senior Stage Combat Instructor, Kaitlin examines and teaches across the UK with the Academy of Performance Combat. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to my YouTube channel for more entertainment videos. So let's jump straight into the podcast. Hello, Kaitlin.
Hello.
Hello. Thank
Hi.
you for coming to this podcast.
That's quite all right. Lovely to be here.
That bio we did was very interesting, very long CV. But could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself, about Kaitlin?
Yeah, of course. So I'm Kaitlin. I am originally from Lincoln. I ended up moving over here maybe about 12 years ago and started off trying to pursue my acting career a little bit, but I was already training to be a fight director while I kind of was over here. I was a stage combat teacher when I initially moved over, and then one thing led to another really, and suddenly I kind of looked back and went, oh, I've climbed this mountain and now I'm a fight director. So it's kind of been a bit of a strange little journey, but I do that. I used to do a lot of singing and do a lot of kind of actor musician stuff as well. So it's kind of been a bit of a strange mashup of a career, but yeah, mostly I do fight directing now.
Right. So when did you decide that you wanted to work in the entertainment industry?
Do you know what? That's a really interesting question because I can't really remember when it was. I think when I was a kid, I kind of went to a school that was really academic based. So I always had a view of kind of doing something sensible. So I kind of went off to university and I did an English degree. And then when I came to kind of leaving university, there were a few of us that had kind of got into the drama society and decided that actually maybe this is what we wanted to do. So I think it was quite late. I kind of always wanted to be a primary school teacher. And then when I was at university, kind of found acting, and we helped each other to prepare monologues and stuff and auditioned, and we all got in. So it was kind of a later thing. So when I went to drama school, I was already sort of in my early 20s, which is quite late for drama school. So I did a postgrad, and then after that was when I kind of got properly hooked on it.
So acting, singing, fight
Yes.
choreographer,
Yes.
weapons training,
Yes.
stage combat, teacher.
Yeah.
Which do you enjoy the most?
They all have different things which I love about them. Acting, you cannot beat being in front of an audience and kind of getting that instant response from them. And
So that's theatre.
that's theatre, yeah. But on camera, I love working on camera because you get redos. You know, if something goes wrong, you get to do it again. But it's a far more technical skill because it's smaller and you've got to really look for the detail and you've got to remember exactly what you did last time so that you can recreate it. Whereas on stage, you can feel the journey of the character throughout the entire performance anew every night because the audience that are watching it are there for the first time and that's the one they're going to see. Whereas on camera, you've got to always be really aware of what the editor needs, what the director needs, not blocking certain things, making sure that you're in the right place at the right time. There is some leeway within your performance, obviously, but it's quite a technical thing. And somebody else then makes the choices as to which of your performances that you gave across the takes is going to be used. So it's exciting in both ways for acting. When it comes to the stage combat part of my life, it's kind of ended up being the biggest bit, sort of by accident. It was kind of a side shift that I did as a job in order to maintain the lifestyle to be an actor, but it's ended up being my main thing because there's fewer of us, basically. So I've kind of ended up teaching, which is the thing that kind of came first in stage combat. You know, I did all my performance certificates when I was an actor, and then thought, well, what can I do next? So then followed it on to becoming a teacher. And then once I was a teacher, I followed that through to becoming a fight director. And they each have different elements to them which make them enjoyable. Teaching is great because you're passing on your knowledge to other people, and you see their learning and the fact that you perhaps have inspired them to take on something that made them really nervous. A lot of my students kind of go on massive journeys throughout the year that I teach them in a drama school. And it's just amazing to kind of go through that process with students and actors who may come to train on some of the other courses I run. But fight direction is bonkers. I love it. It's so silly. It's such a silly job to have. And my other half has stopped asking me what I've been doing because he doesn't quite know how to cope if my answer is, well, today I strangled a child, or today I stabbed an old lady, or today we did this, or today we did that. And he kind of just now asks me where I've been as opposed to what I've done, which is kind of easier for him to kind of deal with. But I just love it because you're dealing with amazing performers, amazing creatives like directors. If you're on camera, you're dealing with people who are at the top of their game and just want to tell amazing stories. So every element of what I do has its own enjoyable things. Otherwise, I wouldn't still advertise that I do them, if that makes any sense at all.
So you enjoy the acting, but it seems as though your heart's going towards the teaching and working as a team, a collaborative team produced.
I think so. I mean, part of it is a lazy element in terms of I can tell somebody else how to do it and then sit back and just watch. So that's quite nice. But there's always a part of me when I'm acting where I suddenly kind of go, this is why I started my journey into the creative industry in the first place. So any opportunity I get given to perform is amazing. But it comes with responsibility now, I suppose, because I now have to prove that I can do the things that I teach others to do. So if I teach somebody to do something, I then have to be able to do it myself when I do it. So there's always that kind of like little edge to it for me of kind of going, I've got to put my money where my mouth is now and actually be able to do it myself. So
I'm surprised you said lazy, because I imagine if you're teaching someone, you're being critical. And
of course.
And there's a lot of work involved there.
Of course, there is a lot of work. When I'm saying lazy, I mean it's a way for me to not have to exert the physical energy of performing a fight myself, I suppose. But it is quite a tricky balance between giving them enough information for them to process what I need them to achieve, but not overloading them so that they can't sort of let fly with what they have. So there's always that fine line of kind of going, right, I'll give you this, this and this, and then we'll look at that in a bit. Let's get you going with these things first. So it's quite a process teaching nowadays, yeah.
I'm going to ask you much more about your teaching and things that you do there. So let's just do a little bit more still about Kaitlin, the actor.
Okay.
Which roles have you enjoyed playing the most?
So.
Because I believe you've been at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival.
I have, yes. So I went to the festival a few years ago with a one-woman show that was possibly the most terrifying thing I've ever done, because there was no moment of waiting and doing anything physical. It was just words and more words and more words. Sometimes when you see one-person shows, you see them doing physicality stuff as well. So you get that sort of balance between the speaking and the doing. Whereas the show that I did, I played 3 different characters, all of whom had an awful lot to say. And it was utterly terrifying, because if I dropped anything, it became really hard to get back on track. And it was just an hour and 10 minutes of relentless talking. And it was terrifying. And I just remember waking up every morning with the show being at 5 o'clock and just having this dread in the pit of my stomach.
Worse than butterflies?
Worse than butterflies. It was possibly the worst stage fright I've ever had. And I don't generally suffer from stage fright, but it was utterly terrifying. And I'd get to the show and I'd do the show and it'd be fine. And then I'd come out feeling so amazing. But then the next morning it'd all start all over again. So yes, I did that. And that's the one show that if I ever think to myself, I don't think I can do this, that's the one where I say, hang on a minute, no, you did that show, so you can do this, because if you can do that, you can do anything. So I really enjoyed the story, and I did enjoy it overall, but it was terrifying the whole time.
Was you exhausted at the end of it?
Yeah.
Needed
absolutely,
a break?
Definitely, yeah. And that was amazing. But then when I was at drama school, I think when you are a trainee actor or somebody who's young and naive and not in the industry yet, you have this picture in your head of what you're going to do in your career. And for me, I'm tall, and I, in my brain, sort of told myself that I would always play these willowy romantic leads, because I had the look of a romantic lead. And then the first job that I had when I left drama school, I played all these kind of character parts in the Threepenny Opera, and they were all very funny parts, and I wasn't convinced that I could be funny, and it was a really quick learning curve. And suddenly I found out that, oh, okay, I'm not a romantic lead. I'm the kind of like ugly old lady that kind of talks like, and I'm all these kind of really silly characters. And so I fell in love with pantomime. I was brought up with pantomime, and I love panto. I absolutely love it. And I know that some people...
you don't.
Oh, yes, I do. And I know that some people kind of think that panto is not a serious art form, but it's hard. It's possibly like the hardest work that I've ever done, when I have done panto.
More so than the Fringe?
Oh, yes. Oh, goodness, yeah.
Right.
When you're having to get up and be in the theatre and putting your makeup on at 7 to do a show at 10 in the morning for kids, and then doing a show in the afternoon, and then some companies do 3 in a day. So you can be exhausted by the end of one day, and you've got all the singing, got all the dancing, you've got
and that runs
fights,
over several weeks.
Yeah. I mean, I think some companies, I think the longest running one that I did, we started rehearsals in the middle of October, and we didn't close until halfway through January, and it opened in the first week of November. So some of them can be really long contracts, but the glitter, the music, the response from the audience, it's exhilarating. I love pantomime. So even though I love kind of doing all the serious straight characters, I love playing silly characters as well. So there's kind of big juxtaposition there between what I like doing.
Such a long run. I mean, how do you stop yourself from just becoming an automaton and just...
Well,
does it depend on the audience?
I think so. So with panto, it's always really interesting, because obviously you are quite a close-knit team, and it's always really funny because with panto you're encouraged to be silly within reason, obviously. You don't, and also you always want it to be fun for the audience. You mustn't kind of just have in jokes between the cast, but every so often things will creep in where you'll play silly games with each other on stage. I remember in one of them that was at Oldham Coliseum, there was a scene in Mother Goose that I was in, and there was a scene where Mother Goose is on trial I can't remember the reason, but it's pantomime. Who needs a reason? But she was on trial in Gooseland, and for some reason, we all decided that every time we did the scene, we all had to do it in a different accent. So on one performance, all of us had to do it in a Scottish accent. In another performance, we all had to do it in an American accent. In another one, and there was no reason to it, but the audience just found it really funny.
Hilarious.
And we'd just come on and do this scene in these bonkers accents. And we never really got in trouble for it, but it's the sort of thing that you shouldn't really do in any other world than panto. So there's ways of kind of like keeping yourself amused through these runs. But it's an interesting thing because every audience is different. Every show is slightly different. And it also means that, as I said before, you're living the life of that character anew every time you do it. So, but most plays, unless they're kind of places like the RSC or in the West End, you don't generally do plays for more than a month, generally. I think most places kind of try to limit it for that reason.
Kaitlin, you mentioned the Oldham Coliseum. I believe you're playing there soon.
I am, yeah. It's I think my personal feelings about that theatre are so strong. It was such a big part of my life for a long time. I worked there as an actor to start with, doing pantos, and then they backed the show that went to Edinburgh and gave us rehearsal space and gave us a lot of help with that production. And I worked on a lot of the shows in the studio there, both on stage and off. And then I also worked with them in terms of their outreach projects to the community, so education and community-based things, doing stage combat. Even through the lockdown, I did sort of stage combat videos for schools. So I don't know if you remember, in lockdown there was the famous video of all the actors who would deliver a punch and then it would cut to a next actor receiving and then giving a punch. So they kind of did a chain reaction of stuff like that. So I kind of did a video with them to send out to schools on how to do that themselves. And then the schools all sent in videos of all the kids doing it, which was great. Right. And then I've just worked with them so often. And then as a fight director, when Chris Lawson took over as the artistic director, he got me in to do fight direction for them. So I've got such a long association with that theatre, and the fact that it's come to the end that it has is so unbelievably sad. It's got such a big, rich history, and it has been the starting point for so many actors and creatives. And it's a theatre that really doesn't deserve to come to the sticky end that it has, to be honest, and my own personal feelings towards what has happened and who is culpable for it is probably not something we should go into today, but it's a travesty, in my own opinion. And this Friday, they are doing a farewell show, which is called Encore. And they've just been in touch with lots of people who have worked there and performed there, and they've just brought everyone together. So I'm actually, having spoken about panto, I'm doing a sort of song and dance number with the ghosts of panto past, I suppose you'd call us. We're kind of like a big group of people who've been in the pantomimes there over the years, and they'll have other bits of singing and dance from musicals that have been on there. They've got lots of actors doing snippets of past productions. They'll have people who run the sort of community projects, talking and sort of paying a little homage to all of that. And they've also got a little piece of a play that was going to be produced, but unfortunately couldn't be put on in the end, from I, Daniel Blake, which was a film which was adapted for stage for Oldham. And they've got, I think they've got Maxine Peake and Christopher Eccleston coming to do that. So it's quite well supported, and the fact that the theatre is loved that much is just amazing.
Yeah, it is a shame, isn't it?
It's awful.
That's great. So should we go into some of the roles that you do as a teacher, coordinator? So what does a fight director do?
Okay, so a fight director. My job as a fight director is to basically create with the creative team and with the actors the part of the story where something physically violent happens, or if there's any sort of aggression. And that process usually starts when I get to see a script. I'll talk to the director, and we kind of map out exactly what we'd like that moment or fight to be. They'll have their opinions on what they want. I offer my thoughts and feelings. I can advise on weapons, especially if it's like a period piece. It's kind of like working together to create the world in which this thing happens. And then when I go in to meet the actors, I like to know from them if they've done any before, who they've worked with before, because all knowledge is really helpful. And generally speaking, because the world in which I work is quite a small one, we all know each other. So it means that if they mention a particular person's name, I'll be able to go, oh, okay, so they do things like that. So I know that you've probably been told to do it like this, which is helpful because I'll know what their knowledge base is. And also if I then have to do things slightly differently, I can say, look, I know that they do things like this, but I do it like this because of this, this and this. And then I like to work really collaboratively because ultimately the actors are the ones that have to do it every time. I don't like to pre-plan things. I like to kind of find things in the moment and create things that suit them physically and emotionally, because they will know their characters' motivations, they will know their characters' thoughts and feelings. And if I go in and say, right, we're going to do this, this and this, they may have that feeling of, it doesn't sit right with me because I don't feel my character would do that. And then it becomes not a trade-off, but a kind of discussion of, okay, this is kind of what we've got as a rough shape. How do we all feel about it? Okay, that's fine. Or no, we don't like that bit. Okay, we'll change that bit. And I'm quite adaptable in that respect. There are people in the industry past who, this is the fight, this is what you do. Whereas for me, if something's not working, then it'll just become a problem later down the line. So I'm very keen on just going back in if I need to and kind of going, okay, well, no, that doesn't work. How about this instead? Or if they come up with a better idea, there's no point in being precious about it at all. You just kind of go.
As with all things in the entertainment industry, it's a collaboration.
Of course, yeah, absolutely. So my main focus is making sure that the director is happy, that the actors are happy. I work with the stage management team quite closely to kind of make sure they're happy, because sometimes costumes are hired and they're not allowed to get blood on them and things like that, And
that stain.
Yes, of course. And just making sure
and not real blood, by the way.
No, not real blood, no.
So does stage blood wash out?
Do you know what? Sometimes, no. Depends how it's been made, really. Usually the stuff that you can buy sort of wholesale from actual manufacturers of stage blood, and yes, there is such a thing, which is such a strange thing. Generally speaking, that is always machine washable, and that's fine. But sometimes if people haven't got the budget, they will create their own concoction out of cochineal or food colouring, and they'll try and they'll kind of, and then that's when you get like bright red hands and stains that don't come out. Yeah.
So who do you meet with? I imagine you meet with the director first, and then you discuss what you want from the roles, and then you meet with the actors. And
yeah, generally speaking, I mean, usually the first point of contact is a producer will get in touch and sort of do an AV check, an availability check, or Or they'll just kind of offer the role saying, you know, we like working with you last time, so come on in. And then it becomes a discussion between myself and the director. I'll ask to see a script. And usually I won't get to meet the actors until I walk in the room on the first day of rehearsal.
At what point do you discuss the difference or the conflicts between entertainment and the bangs, the punches and everything, and safety?
Immediately, always. Like they kind of go hand in hand. So as I'm teaching the moves, I will kind of reinforce that as I go. So with every single thing, we talk about this is what it will look like, but this is how you do it to make it safe. So they kind of run parallel to each other. And usually the thing that people find within theatrical fight or a you know, I use the term theatrical even though I refer to camera as well, which some people find really difficult to sort of reconcile in their head because they don't want it to be theatrical, they want it to be realistic. But in terms of a acted fight, let's say, people can sometimes find the move they have to do to make it look like the thing that it's supposed to represent weird, because it's not the thing that you're actually trying to make it look like. So, for example, anybody that's ever done any actual boxing or martial arts, there's a thing called telegraphing, which we are drilled not to do. We do not want our opponent to know it's coming. However, on camera, on stage, as an actor, you absolutely need everybody to know it's coming. And so the movement becomes really strange. And sometimes actors have that background knowledge of a hobby that they do outside of acting. And for me to then come in and say, no, you need to make that punch really, really big. And you need to, you know, really telegraph it. Sometimes they can't reconcile it in their brain that the difference between this and this massive movement is
a haymaker.
They just can't compute. And it's all about the safety. But that's about the safety and the performance of it. Because, for example, on camera, you've got a very small viewpoint. But if I was to throw a punch at a natural speed, the camera wouldn't pick it up, especially if it's over the shoulder, because the arm goes through shot too quickly. So you've got to kind of slow it down and overact it. Other people kind of might do it in a slightly different way. But for me, it's about the speed of the delivery and the energy that's presented with the punch, especially if it's a very narrow viewpoint. With stage, however, what you've got to think of is, whereas a camera is like one laser beam that your hand has to go through between it and the target, on stage, you've got hundreds, maybe thousands of these laser beams between each individual person in the audience's eye and the target. And your fist has to pass through every single one of them. So if I throw just a little punch, it will only work for a very narrow section of the audience. Whereas if I'm on a big proscenium arch stage and I take my fist right out here, then I've covered everybody off over there. And then as it travels through, it covers everybody else here. And then as it comes out the other side, it then covers everybody who's on that side. So sometimes trying to reprogram brains to kind of go, it's not about what you can see, it's about what the audience can see, can be quite tricky. Plus, in terms of telegraphing, that's a safety thing. It's like, if I go, I'm going to punch you now, it buys the audience time to see that it's happening, and it buys the actor time to see that it's coming.
Whilst the actor's thinking of his lines.
Exactly.
Yes. I was going to ask you about that, because when it's blocked out for cameras,
yeah,
you probably don't have to give as wide a. If you're punching me, it doesn't have to miss as much, but when you've got a whole auditorium,
Yes.
And does it have to be even more flamboyant on theatre?
I don't think. Well, flamboyant. I wouldn't say flamboyant. I'd say larger scale, and I'd say more energized. So I talk an awful lot about intention when I teach. The instant thing that students do when you give them choreography is, right, let's go faster. Yeah. And I try really hard never to use that word fast, because fast is just fast. It doesn't have any meaning behind it. And your fast might be different to my fast. So intent is a completely different thing. So if my character has full intent, then that means that you are responding to my intent at the correct pace. And then you're giving your intent to do harm back, which then allows it to ride at the correct pace that it should. So as long as you're filling it with that acting intent, then generally speaking, a fight will go at the correct pace and the correct energy. On camera, it can really mess with your head. And this is why I love doing camera work, because you get more than one go at it. So if it goes wrong, you get to do it again. And that is that depending on where the camera is, you have to change the punch in order to make it look like something that it might not at all be. So, for example, if the camera was over my shoulder here and I was delivering a punch straight to your face, what is straight to your face for my eyes is not straight to your face for the camera. So where I'm aiming would have to alter slightly so that it looked like it hit you for the camera. So for me, for my eyes, that might be here, but for the camera, it might be here. So trying to get your head around that when you are the person delivering it can sometimes be really, really tricky. And you've just got to always, as the coordinator or director, you've got to feed that back to the actor. Okay, no, I need your fist to kind of be placed to the left.
Don't aim for the nose, aim for the shoulder or something.
Yeah, exactly. So, and it's all dependent on where the camera is. And then sometimes you'll see I love kind of like behind the scenes stuff on films, you know, where they have those little clips of what's happened. Sometimes you will see a fight coordinator getting hold of the cameraman or the DOP and kind of actually physically going, right, if you just move around here. So as the action's happening, looking in the viewpoint, kind of going, right, if you move here now, then you'll catch that because they're having problem correcting for you. So it's a kind of way off between how much can I get out of the actors, okay, and how much do I need the camera to correct? Whereas on stage, you don't get that. You've got to get it right as it's happening every time, if that makes sense.
So have you had any funny moments where an actor just hasn't been able to do anything let's go to one side and let's practice this?
Yes, I have actually. And it's quite an interesting it's quite an interesting thing, because in this industry, which isn't incorrect at all, the director is going to cast the person that they deem best for the job, that they feel is going to portray the character the best. And sometimes that means that some of the things that perhaps they need to do, if they don't necessarily have as much training as somebody else who didn't quite get the job because they weren't quite right for the role, it then becomes my job to teach them. So sometimes you'll go in and there'll be Hamlet, for example, who's never even seen a sword before. So you've got to teach them from scratch how to do a sword fight and how to look like they're brilliant sword fighters. And that happened to me when I was working on a Hamlet down in Cambridge, where the two lads, Laertes and Hamlet, bless their hearts, they were wonderful actors, they were really great in the roles, but they had never seen a sword before, either of them. And, you know, no spoilers, but in Hamlet there's a great big sword fight at the end.
One or two.
And I had a bit of a job, because they were full of enthusiasm, but just hadn't ever even heard of stage combat, let alone done any. So I had to spend an awful lot of time with them. But what they achieved in the end, because they were determined and because they understood the gravity of the job that they had to do, we pulled out an amazing sword fight in the end, because they went, actually, do you know what? If we don't do this, it's gonna be awful. So we kind of managed to pull together a really great sword fight. The other thing was that it was outdoor theatre. So not only did I have to teach them how to sword fight, but I also had to teach them how to cope in different weather. So in terms of, they were on grass, sometimes it would rain. So very slippy, very, very slippy. So then not only did I have to make sure that they could do the sword fight, but I had to make sure that they knew what to do. And usually the thing that we take away is the kind of the bolder foot movements. So we kind of make the footwork smaller while maintaining the flourishes of the upper body, if that makes sense.
The way you move your hand then, which are
Yes.
we talking foils or?
It was, yeah. So it was set in medieval, so it was Elizabethan, and it was a good old rapier fight. It was a really good routine that they ended up doing, which was fab. But that was a serious kind of right guys, this is what we need to achieve. This is what I'm going to need you to have to do. And it went down really, really well. The other story I have, which is a bit of a name drop, but I was in pantomime in Liverpool, pantomime again, and I was the fight captain on the show, so I wasn't actually a fight director at that point. I was just in the show, and it was my job to kind of maintain the fights for the fight director and work with the actors just to kind of keep them ticking over while the fight director kind of popped off to do all
That's
the
a
work.
position I've never heard of. Fight captain.
Fight captain, yes. So so a fight captain's job is literally to know all of the fights and every part of the fight so that they can run rehearsals and oversee it. We don't change anything. We liaise with the stage management team, who then liaise back to the fight director. And it's basically just having somebody dedicated in the room who can sort of help the actors with tricky bits or teach it to the understudies and stuff like that. Luckily, I was already a stage combat teacher at that point, which is probably why they gave me the job, because I was kind of like the most qualified person in the room. But on that show, we had the brilliant Henry Winkler, who was the Fonz. He was playing Captain Hook. And on the first day, he came up to me and he was so wonderful as a human being, just so humble and friendly and put everybody at ease. But he came up to me and said, "You're Kaitlin, you're going to be the fight captain, aren't you?" And I went, "Yes." And he went, "I'm dyslexic and I'm dyspraxic." And I went, "Oh, okay, right." And we developed this language for the fight where instead of calling the moves what they actually were, we gave him really funny narratives that he could teach himself. So, for example, if he was parrying sort of in a low line from one side to the other with thrusts coming towards him, we would refer that as sweeping the floor, so that he knew that he just had to kind of move his arm from side to side. If he was cutting from one side to another, bringing the sword across in front of his face, we would say, "Right, now you're kissing the blade." So he would kind of scoop it past his face like he was kissing it, and then to the other side. And we would have, if he had to do hand parries, he would shut the door, So he kind of came up with these stories in his head, which he would say to himself as he was doing it. And it was really great because he by the end of rehearsals was a fully fledged sword fighter and kind of felt really sort of happy with a sword in his hand.
I love the hand movements. I can see what you're trying to do there with the hand movements. I'm a martial artist. I've done martial arts for many years. And recently, in the last few years, I do HEMA. historical European martial arts. So there's lots of weapons in that.
Yes.
Everything from staffs to swords, to rapiers, daggers, long swords. Do you like swords? And what I was getting at is the swords that we use in HEMA, they have a flex to them. They're all blunt. Yeah. There's no live blades, and there's a definite flex to them. Is that the same for stage?
It's similar. So in terms of what we tend to use, so for example, if you have anything that is sort of 16th century rapier through to 18th century small sword, anything like that, we use an épée blade that has a sort of dressed handle. So it'll generally be speaking something that's historically accurate in the hilt, but then it's a kind of an épée blade. And usually they are ones that have been made specifically for stage so that they don't have the sports button on the end, so that they don't have the rubber stopper on the end. They've been turned in such a way that they're folded with a blunt point, but they've not got anything that's obviously a stopper on the end, as it were. And the reason why we tend to use those is because they're strongest. So if we use a foil blade, they have the bend in them, but they're not designed to cut with. So if you do cuts down to the head, for example, sometimes when parried, the foil blade can whip. So because we don't wear protection on our heads, generally speaking, unless it's part of the production, that runs the risk of something whipping down and hitting you. Similarly on, arms. Generally speaking, we don't wear plastrons or padding on stage unless it's part of the costuming for it.
So what about when you come to do a thrust?
So because an épée blade is designed for cutting and thrusting, then we tend to favour that because the blade will maintain its strength, which means that as we go to parry it or as we go to move out the way of it, it's not going to do anything unexpected, if that makes sense. So as the blade is coming in, we tend to do a thing where we will extend first, then move the rest of our body, because it buys the other actor more time. So it's basically telegraphing for the thrust and it's telegraphing for the cut. So we tend to start the movement of the arm first, then step into it, because then there's more time basically to see it coming. But with an épée blade, it doesn't then whip. So generally speaking, we like the more solid blades because we know how they're going to behave. Things where they've got a lot of flex in them, as you hit them, they tend to kind of move. So then it becomes a strange sensation in the arm for the actor, but also it becomes a little bit unpredictable as to where that blade might be for the next thing. So they're always blunt, but I always say to them, if you push hard enough, it'll still go in, but we tend to favour sort of solid blades as opposed to flexible blades.
If you go for a thrust, it's off, is it?
Not always. There's different schools of thought on this, depending on which training board you've come under. Basically.
Because one of my favourite films is The Duelists.
Amazing.
And that first scene
film
in the field where Harvey Keitel gets the first victim. I'm not sure who he is.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Well, the person who plays that first victim is the fight director on the film. So he's a proper man. But the interesting thing is that I suppose it's that payoff between, if it's sparring, you need that extra little safety because the person on the other end doesn't know what's going to happen. Whereas with acting and sort of staged fighting, we don't ever improvise it. So we know where it's going to go. And as long as you rehearse it to the extent where it becomes really natural and logical, then hopefully the fact that it's coming towards me, I know it's happening. So I have that preordained knowledge that this is the move I have to do to get out of the way. So the fact that the weapon doesn't have that kind of flex in it is kind of negated by the fact that we know what's going to happen in a way, which there's lots of different kind of opinions on, which I completely get. But for me, I prefer a weapon that I know where it's going to be at all times and how it's going to behave coming towards me.
Do the daggers still go into the blade?
No.
No.
Into the handle?
Yes.
No. We don't.
Into the handle.
Yeah, we don't generally do that anymore because they've malfunctioned too many times. So if you get, it's quite an old school thing actually. What can happen, especially if you're using stage blood, is they can get sticky. So then they get jammed. So we don't tend to do that anymore. We tend to use techniques where there's a turn of the wrist so that it becomes placed, or it's victim-led, which is a really strange term for it, but where as it's coming in, it's kind of handled and then I take over to place it. But generally speaking, like a blade, if it's coming in to kind of stab or cut, there's a slight movement in the wrist which just then turns it onto the body as opposed to into the body.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So do you practice martial arts?
Do you know what I used to? I used to for a long time. So when I was a kid, I did judo because my older brothers did it. My mum actually gave me a choice. She said, you can go to ballet because you're a girl, or you can go to martial arts with your brothers. And I went, I'll go to martial arts with my brothers.
Is that because you wanted to beat your brothers up?
I think it was just because I didn't want to be left out. I was a bit of a tomboy, to be honest. But yeah.
But
absolutely.
you have been on the mats. You have been on the dojo. And have you been in the ring? Have you done boxing as well?
No, I haven't. I have a brilliant student in Manchester who was a youth boxer. So he was able to kind of put me through my paces in terms of boxing so that I kind of understood what I needed to emulate. I worked on a show at one of the drama schools in Manchester, and it was boxing based. So he was actually in the cast. So he and I were able to work together. He'd say, okay, well, this is what the technique is. And I was able to then go, okay, let me try that. Okay, right. So to then make it what we need it to be, we'll need to do this to it. So it's kind of, it's interesting.
I like the two different poses there. When you were boxing like that, and then you said,
but we kind of have to, kind of just have to open things out a little bit.
You need to drop that guard because we need to see your eyes.
Exactly. But it's quite interesting in terms of the martial arts that I've done over the years. You know, I did judo as a kid, which is great because it's all about being able to fall safely, which is
judo
fun.
Is great for children.
It's brilliant, and it's really, really great for actors as well. You know, when I teach, I do a whole class where I get a load of mats out, and we spend the whole hour and a half just falling on the floor, because ultimately, if you know how to fall instinctively, then should anything go wrong, then you'll be okay. You know, which is fantastic. We do rolling, we do all sorts of stuff. Getting them used to kind of like their body having pressure on it and stuff like that. And then I did Aikido for a long time, which apparently as a woman is a great martial art to do, because generally speaking, most aggressors are bigger than you, apparently. I mean, I'm quite a tall lady, which is great. You know, there's that taught me an awful lot about simplicity and economy of movement and balance. It's quite I wouldn't say it's passive, but it's quite an accepting martial art. So you kind of take what's being given to you and redirect it.
Not as extreme as Tai Chi, where it's...
No, yeah. It's there's an awful lot of flow to it, which is really helpful for what I do, because it's one of the words I use the most with my students is, okay, that's great, but you're riding the clutch. You know, all the movements are kind of like really jagged. Find the flow through it. so that you kind of not making me feel like it's all really hard. And then I did Kung Fu for a little bit, and I did kickboxing, which is completely the opposite of Aikido. I'd spent so long doing Aikido that trying to get off the ground for kickboxing was really hard, because I'd spent so long kind of having my center nice and low that as soon as I tried to kind of do kickboxing where you've got to bounce around a lot, I was just like, but why? Why am I bouncing?
So your martial arts journey is like that.
Yeah,
Normally,
it's all over the place.
We all start off with the hard ones, like Thai boxing, and I started. And then you ease off into weapons because we're all getting old and it hurts and you don't recover as much.
Yeah, it's been a really funny one, because I suppose for me it was, I wanted to be able to kind of cherry pick the things that I wanted. And I knew that the reason I was doing it was to attain my entry requirements to get onto the register. And some of them are quicker paths than others. So while I absolutely loved Aikido, I did it for years before I got very far. And if you're going to do Aikido, you've got to just accept that you'll probably not be a black belt until you're old and grey. It's quite a long path to get there. Whereas things like kickboxing, you can kind of literally punch your way through it quite quickly.
If you're successful in the ring.
Exactly.
You're a black belt.
Exactly. I never actually competed because I was an actor, and even though my instructor kept saying, "You're good at this, you should come to competition," I was like, the problem is I need this to stay looking like this.
I can't go on the stage with a black eye.
No, exactly. I need my face to match my headshots. And he would always, not literally, but he'd always be quite like strict with me and kick me up the arse a bit, because I'd done Aikido for so long. I would wait, and I would corner step, and I would just wait, and I'd wait, and I'd wait until somebody got close enough, and then I'd hit them. Whereas he'd be like, "No, you gotta be jump, you gotta bounce, you gotta do this, you gotta, And I was like, "But why? He's wearing himself out. I'm just waiting." And he was just like, "You gotta get out of that Japanese mindset. You gotta get out of it. Come on, jump." And I was like, "But it hurts my knees."
But you won't know you're coming. You'll be able to dodge and weave. And...
Exactly. But that's also really interesting, because in terms of what we do in stage combat, we do not want that, because with all the bounce becomes, again, unpredictability of target and unpredictability of distance.
So you want it more like the katas?
Exactly, where it's really set. So in terms of your footwork, you're grounded, you're placed, you always know your distance, you always know exactly where your partner's going to be. And it's always something I always say to people when they come to do classes with me. I always ask them, what have you done before in terms of combative sports or, pastimes? And I will then always back it up with, there might be some things that you need to unlearn, which you'll find difficult. And usually it's the bounce, it's the jump. And while it's incredibly valid for that discipline, for this discipline, we have to get rid of it. And that's kind of usually the one thing that they find the hardest is kind of like that constant moving about. Because if you're doing that on camera, you're making it really hard for the camera to follow you. And if you're doing it on stage, they get seasick in the audience. And your partner won't know where you are. So
imagine the DOP saying, "I'm not using a wide angle, I want a close-up."
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting, actually, because there was a kind of trend a few years ago with, what was it called, Pitch Black, that series of films with Vin Diesel in it, where there was a tendency for really shaky camera work on fights
to give it authenticity.
And I kind of ended up watching it feeling a little bit queasy, but also kind of thinking, what are they trying to hide? What wasn't possible within this sequence that they had to just hide it by doing this?
Oh, so you were seeing it with your professional eye?
Yeah, well, yeah. My other half hates watching fights with me on TV because I will literally sit there and he won't watch the fight. He'll kind of look at me, and if I'm kind of like engrossed, then he'll kind of go, okay, this is a good fight, I can watch it. Whereas if I'm kind of like,
does he take the remote off you in case you constantly reverse it back?
No, I'm not that bad, but I will literally just kind of go. And then I'll be like watching the credits to find out who did it, who set it, or who filmed it, and I'll be like, oh. So
that's great. So can we go into the Academy of Combat Performance?
Of course, yes.
Tell me more.
Yes, so the Academy of Performance Combat is one of the equity ratified training bodies of stage combat within the UK. And for a very long time, there were two main boards. There was the British Academy of Dramatic Combat and the British Academy of Stage and Screen Combat. And it's kind of touching on what I said before about targeting and slightly different beliefs in terms of what should be done and what shouldn't be done. They all have different syllabuses. We just felt that the way that students were examined could be tightened up, really. So there were a few of us that kind of stepped away from that academy and kind of set up another one in order to just refine the exam process. And in terms of what we do, it's been going quite a long time now, which is great. There's a few people in it who are equity registered fight directors. We have lots and lots of trainee teachers coming up through the ranks now who are amazing, and it's a really fast growing organisation. And as I said, we're ratified by equity, which means that the Actors Union approve of how we train actors, but it is mostly a training board. So we teach in drama schools, we teach our own private courses, and I suppose it's kind of like we're each individual businesses that are examined by this board.
So can an actor come to you to be saying, as an individual themselves, saying, I want to be able to improve on such and such a skill?
Yes, of course. Yeah. We're quite welcoming of anyone and everyone, really. So there's different routes. So teachers who have placements within drama schools, and then by default, that drama school is then examined by the APC. There's the same individuals. So for me, example, I teach in a drama school, but I also run my own little courses from time to time. So I will run weekend workshops or week-long courses, and I will then book an examiner to come and assess them at the end of it. But then every so often you'll get people come and say, can I have private lessons? And that's fine. It's generally easier if there's more than one of them. So if they come as a pair, that's a bit easier to facilitate, because it's really hard to teach somebody something while you are also in it, if that makes sense. So while you can, to a certain extent, say, okay, this is what we're going to do it with me, sometimes you've got to be able to step outside it and actually watch what somebody is doing overall physically. And if you're within it yourself, you can't always tell what they're doing. So I always sort of suggest to people, if you can come as a pair, then it's easier. But yes, we kind of run all sorts of different things. We kind of try to do every weapon at every level, if that makes sense. There's some that you've got to kind of have a bit more working knowledge of how to use a weapon before we let you loose on. But generally speaking, we'll try and do all the main ones at a sort of introductory basic level. And then once you've got that down, you can move up to the next level of difficulty with that weapon, up to the next one, etc.
So if someone was interested in finding out about you, where's the best part of contact? Is it your website or...
In terms of the APC, yes, the APC's website is probably the best one. We do have Facebook group as well, and Twitter, which I can make sure that those, I don't know them off the top of my head.
I'll put links below.
Thank you.
To everything like that.
They're going to be appalled with me for not knowing.
That's great. So what is it with the Manchester School of Theatre as well?
So the Manchester School of Theatre is the drama school that I teach in, and they are an amazing drama school. They are part of Man Met Uni, and I predominantly work with the second years on their stage combat, and then when I work with them again, it's generally on their final year shows, which is their third year productions. So they get me for stage combat in the second year, and then me as a fight director in their third year as well.
So just before we move on, your classes, are they physically demanding?
Yes, I would say so. Yeah, I mean, it
like
depends
going
what
to
it
the
is.
gym?
To a certain extent, to start with, isn't necessarily physically demanding, but it can be quite mentally demanding because, yes, we're doing something physical, but there's an awful lot of mental checks that you have to kind of constantly do, especially when you get onto what we term single sword, which at basic level is a mashup of rapier and small sword. So it's kind of cutting and thrusting. And just getting their heads around the technique and what everything's called. And, you know, I like to use the actual terminology for it. Italian terminology, yes, all that kind of montante sotto mano and all that kind of stuff, you know, and scollambrato doriti and all this kind of thing. And they really find that interesting. But also, if you keep reinforcing it, every so often you'll just kind of go, oh, you have listened. Because I'll say, right, okay, scollambrato reversi, and they'll just do it. And you'll be like, see, it does work if you know what the proper word is.
So how's your German for longsword?
Oh, no. I mean, I'm not too bad at German, but I'm not great at it. I tend to mostly gravitate towards the thing that my body is built for. This is something that actors find really interesting as well, is that everybody's body is naturally built for a particular kind of weapon. So, and this realization for me came out of a student that I worked with years ago, who he said to me, I'm really struggling because I'm not very good at rapier and small sword and all those kind of things. And look at me, I'm never going to be cast as somebody wearing a powdered wig who has to do a sword fight. And he was a tall, really stocky bloke whose, let's say, his face had looked like he'd lived.
I'm picturing a Viking.
Pretty much, yeah. And he said, you know, I'm gonna be cast as Vikings or bouncers or heavies, or, you know, I'm never going to be cast as needing that. But to progress to the next level of difficulty in stage combat, I've got to tick that off before I can move up. And he was kind of one of the reasons why we reformed our exam process, really. So I'm kind of a big believer in this, because there was another guy who was in around at the similar time to him, who, again, he really struggled with some of the really refined stuff, but give him a knife and he was amazing. And so now I kind of cut my students a bit of slack, because I'll look at their physicality and kind of go, it's okay. You're finding this hard, but you will find it hard because you're a Viking and I've given you a toothpick. So, you know, you're going to find it hard. Or I'll say to somebody who's maybe sort of slim and petite, who's trying to swing a broadsword round, well, of course you're going to find this difficult because you're not built for it. But it just means that you've got to focus more on it. That other stuff you can do. This you have to work at.
So do you enter your classroom and you're scanning the students and you go, Viking, knight?
Always. Yeah, you're always kind of scanning. You're always looking for the kind of the physicalities. Another thing, you're looking for muscle mass and where that's placed. Because if somebody is particularly well built, then sometimes what that can do is have an effect on their tendon flexibility. So that means that while we're trying to create the correct image of you know, reaching for the target, if they physically can't straighten their arm, then you're going to have to try and do it in a slightly different way. So you constantly kind of just looking people up and down, kind of going, right, okay, all right, you are very slight, so I'm going to have to really work with you on this so that you can actually physically wield the thing that I've got for you today. So it's you're constantly changing how you work for each individual, which I find so much fun. It's not about me, it's about them learning for me. So if I have to teach it one way for them and then another way for them, then it's really not a problem. And that shouldn't be a problem. It's not, you shouldn't, as a student, my opinion is that as a student, you shouldn't have to fit somebody else's jigsaw puzzle. They should work you out and help you in the way you need, which is what I'm all about.
I moved from Aikido to longsword, but I absolutely love rapier and dagger. And it's so completely different.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, with longsword, everyone likes really going in. So I imagine myself as a romantic leading role.
Of course.
So what sword would you give me?
Oh, okay. So I think you're well suited to a rapier, definitely, because you kind of have the stature for it. Historically, obviously, rapiers were a little bit heftier than the things that you see people wielding.
They were still a murder weapon, though.
They were, yes. Yeah. And I think the thing that I love about rapier is the fact that there were less rules on how you used it. The rules kind of were beginning to come into play, and all the 18th century small sword didn't really exist yet. When I talk to my students about the difference between rapiers and small swords, and the size difference and the weight difference and the cutting edges, and the fact that small swords were just a point and blunt sides and all this kind of stuff, and how with a rapier it was kind of like it was something that you could just pub brawls, and there's something really romantic about a rapier.
It's definitely Romeo and Juliet, the Montagues and the Capulets.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Much so than the modern one with Leonardo, where they were all using guns.
Yeah. Well, I love Shakespeare. I'm a big Shakespeare fan, and I absolutely love finding new ways of telling the stories. And I think that Baz Luhrmann was really clever, really, really clever in how he kind of was able to use the language and apply it to other things. I think that was really good. And I mean, that fight with Tybalt and Mercutio on the beach is cracking. It's a really good fight. And but I'd not seen that film for so long, and then it was on TV not long ago, and I thought, you know what, I'm going to sit and watch this, and I do think that I'd remembered it through rose-tinted glasses of it being when I was a teenager, and and who was in it and all this kind of thing, and there were some things about it that were really, really clever, and then there were some things about it that I just kind of remember now thinking, he had to stretch to make that work. Oh, okay, that was a bit tense.
Oh, you're a professional idol.
But it's, I'm all for taking Shakespeare and giving it a new twist, because why not, eh?
So that's great, Kaitlin. So, Knights of Middle England.
Yes.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
So, the Knights of Middle England are this amazing, amazing group of people in Warwick who train actors to ride horses. I suppose that's kind of the most simple way I can put it. But they're an amazing stunt team who do all the live shows at Warwick Castle, so the jousting shows and everything. But they also travel around. So if you've ever been to like a country show and they've had a jousting team, or people doing medieval horseback stuff, generally speaking, there's a few different groups around the country that do that kind of stuff, and the Knights of Middle England are one of those teams. But they also, as I said, train actors to ride specifically with a view of what would be required on camera for somebody to be riding a horse. So they'll teach you if you've never ridden a horse before, by the end of the week, you'll know how to canter. They're amazing. You can jump. But they'll teach you how to stop a horse on a mark. They'll teach you how to ride carrying a shield and a flag, single rein. They're brilliant. They're absolutely brilliant. And I was somebody that trained on horseback as a kid. I was a child when I learned to ride. But obviously, as you get older, and move away to university, stables are not always cheap or accessible. So I kind of drifted away from it. And the reason I got in touch with them and kind of fell back in with them a little bit was because I was asked to be in a music video for a band over in, I think they're in Halifax or Huddersfield, but they did this music video where the character I was playing needed to ride a horse, needed to just be on horseback. And they asked me, can you ride? And I went, not since a kid, but I can sit on a horse, I know how to sit on a horse, and, I can walk a horse. And they were like, brilliant, we found you this horse, it's great, it's all good. And when I arrived on set, the horse wasn't a horse that was used to filming at all. It was a horse that they found at a local livery yard, and it was a beautiful horse, but it was very skitty. And everybody on set kind of forgot that horses are sort of plains animals, so they have very good long vision. And so people were kind of not trying to spook the horse, so they'd go and hide behind trees and every so often peek out, and the horse would freak, because even though this person was maybe like 200 yards down this lane, the horse could see it, and the horse was like, there's a thing, I don't know what this thing is. So I did this music video, and it got to a point where I could feel this horse was gonna maybe bolt with me on it, and because I was in period costume, I wasn't wearing any helmet or anything like that. It was quite...
Was you side saddle as well?
No, I wasn't, luckily. But I was a bit nervous. And obviously, they're very empathetic animals. So as soon as you start to get nervous, they get more nervous, because they're like, oh my God, you're nervous. Why are you nervous? So there was this mutual freaking out going on.
The volume knobs going higher and higher.
Yes, absolutely. They were trying to get these side shots. So they were coming along the side of the horse with the camera. The camera was freaking the horse out. And I was just... In the end, I sort of said, right, let's stop. Have you got all the footage you need of me actually on the horse, with the horse in view? And they said, yes. I said, okay, the only bit we still need to get is where I'm sat on the horse and somebody else is down there and I'm looking down at them. I'll stand on a wall. And that's what we did. So there's this bit where someone's looking up at me and the shot is actually me cheating it. So I'm on a wall, just kind of moving around like I'm on a horse. And it was at that point that I kind of went, if that horse had bolted, I would not have known what to do at all. So I got in touch with the Knights of Middle England, because I knew that they trained people to ride horses for camera and stuff like that. And I got in touch with them. And I went several times up into the pandemic. And then things have kind of pieced off a little bit and life has got busy. But in the couple of years that I was visiting them, they on purpose put me on a horse that they knew would bolt, because they knew I was terrified of that scenario. So they put me on this horse, and off it went one day. And they'd already kind of been saying to me, well, if that ever does happen to you, then this is the protocol that you need to use, and just remember, you are stronger than the horse, which of course you're not, but it will do what you want it to do eventually. And then they put me on a horse they knew would go, and I managed to stop it, which was exhilarating. And from then on, I could gallop. I'd never been able to gallop before because I was terrified of coming off. And then
it's getting that rhythm.
Yeah,
your backside.
It's transitioning. It's the transitions between the different
speeds,
because it's different rhythms. So as soon as you kind of get that, you understand what it is you need to do to transition. But as a 7-year-old, I'd never been taught that. They were more interested in just not falling off, and that would have come later. But they were fantastic. They're a really great team there. And by the time I left, I was able to fire a bow and arrow off the back of a horse that was at canter, and I hit a target once. So I kind of feel like that's my little achievement. It's a lot of fun. And weirdly, and I didn't believe them when they said this, they said to me that you will forget that you're on a horse because you're so busy trying to fire the bow at a target. And I didn't believe them at all. And, they do it in stages. So they'll walk you along so that and somebody will be with the horse. So they'll walk you along at a really slow pace so that you can get used to when you have to draw your arrow out your boot, knock it, fire it. Where to track, how to, and you hold it in a different way. So with archery, I learned archery when I was a kid. So it's this, but on horseback, it's a thumb pinch. So it's really quick draw. The hardest bit is trying to knock the arrow while you're bouncing about on the back of a horse. But you kind of get used to it after a while. And so they'll do it in stages until suddenly they just let the horse run the route and you're just trying to draw and hit the target. And the instructor was brilliant. She said to me that in competitions where, you're flying through a forest, a bit like in that opening sequence of Disney's Brave, where she's firing all the targets. In competition, sometimes it comes down to who got round the route quickest, because nobody will have hit a target at all, because it's hard. It's really hard. So the fact that I ever hit a target was just brilliant. At a kind of slow canter.
As long as you got a badge, that's the main thing.
As long as that, and I got me on video doing it, so somebody managed to catch me doing it. But it's weird, you do just completely forget that you're on a horse.
I hope you send me that clip for this
I
podcast.
will,
Lovely.
I will, yes.
So out of all these things you've done, what have you found the most difficult to master, achieve?
I can't play the trombone. No. No, I think for me, I'll go back to that one-woman show again. It was so difficult. It was so difficult. And just that feeling of nobody can help me. If something goes wrong, I'm stuffed. I'm going to have to get out of it myself, There was one moment in it very early on where I completely blanked, could not remember what was next. And luckily it was kind of like, I think it might have even been the first show of it. And I was so determined not to have to ask for a line from the person on the tech box. And, there'd been an agreement that if I did need, in those first few shows, if I did need help, then I could ask for it, And I just remember the character I was playing in it at the time was an old lady who drank a lot of gin and tonic. And I had a drink. And I just got to the end of this bit and I kind of, finished that little bit. And I just remember thinking to myself, I took my sip and I thought, if I don't remember what it is, by the time this hits the table, I'm going to have to ask for the line. And literally it went down like that and went, my father, and I remembered what it was straight away. And it was just terrifying, just in that moment, kind of going, if I don't, oh my God, what is it? What is it? What is it? What is it? What is it?
It's almost as though you suddenly became conscious and thought, what am I doing here?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know what to do next.
Yeah, it's very strange. Acting, it's odd.
So I'm a headshot photographer.
Yes.
Do you like having your headshot done?
I do. I do. I think I love seeing the final result of what it all looks like. I think sometimes you can just become super conscious within that scenario. I find it quite difficult to kind of hold a position for too long, because then I kind of feel like, oh, I'm forcing this now. So I've always found that the shoots that I have got the most out of is if it's somebody who's quite chatty. So just having a chat, and then they'll just kind of catch something where they'll go, oh, just hold that. And so it kind of feels more sort of
Relaxed and natural.
accidental.
The trend is now to more of a smile rather than a blank look. Do you prefer
absolutely.
that?
Well, I actually think that the range that you should have, I mean, I've seen so many people over the years, especially like graduate actors and people who've perhaps not been in the industry for very long. They will always pick the ones that they feel make them look the prettiest, or they'll always pick the pictures that paint them in the light they feel they look the best in.
A character they want to be.
Yes. And generally speaking, I saw some quite recently where the expression on the face was exactly the same across all of the photos, which I kind of think, well, you don't need all of these photos. You only need one of those, because it's exactly the same photo. You're just wearing different things, or your hair's back, but it's the same facial expression. And different people have different feelings on this, but I actually think that it's better. I know there was a trend a few years ago to really invest in the let's make it very clear what characters you're capable of playing. So it was a bit of costuming going on, and there was the Shameless photo where you had your hair back and big hoop earrings on, and then there was your lawyer photo, and then there was your nurse photo. There were characters. But I actually think that that you should get a range of facets of your personality and expressions, and there's, as I said, there's no point having one face across 5 different jumpers.
So would you practice in the mirror before the session? Or?
Oh, no. No.
So what about when it comes to self-taping?
I go more on if it felt right now. I think as you get older, you care less. There's that brilliant Helen Mirren quote about, something I would tell myself was, I should have said, fuck off more, and it's kind of, you as you get older, you kind of go, I'll either get the job or I won't. And I think your alignment as to how the industry actually works becomes clearer. You kind of go, okay, it's actually possibly nothing to do with me as to why I didn't get the job. It could be that I'm 2 foot taller than the person they've cast opposite me already. That actually happened to me. I had an audition for a show. It was Robin Hood, and I was up for Maid Marian, and I walked in the room, and the lad who was to play Robin Hood was there, and he was 2 foot shorter than me, and I instantly knew I'm not going to get the job, because it was a very traditional Robin Hood, and I thought I'm not going to get it. You're being very lovely, seeing me sing and do all the stuff that I need to do, and it's really lovely, but you could have read how tall I was on my CV. So I think looking at yourself is just going to drive you insane. So I like the surprise of having the contact sheet come through and then seeing what's there. Definitely.
So have you got an agent?
I do have an agent, yes. They're called Shaker Bailey, and they are brilliant. They're Karl and Rachel. They mostly pull their hair out at the fact that I'm never available for acting work anyway. But
they don't want you on their books.
No, they're amazing. They're so good. And the thing that's lovely is that I first met Karl when he ran a youth theatre in Marple. And so I've known Karl for a very, very long time. And then he and Rachel Bailey set up their agency. And I was in a play in Manchester that had another client from their books in it, and they came to see it. And I ended up needing to look for another agent for various reasons. And I just contacted them. I just sent them an email sort of saying, I'm looking for representation. And I met Karl for a coffee. And because I knew him well enough, he wanted to kind of do the professional thing of chatting to me for a little while. But because I knew them well enough, he said, well, I'll let you into a little secret that the minute your email landed in the inbox, Rachel just went, sign her. Because of the play that she'd seen me in, which was fantastic, So to be that welcomed so quickly it's lovely. And they're fantastic. I count them as my friends, really, because they're so warm, they're brilliant. But mostly, bless them, yeah, they deal with fight direction jobs for me. They still put me up for things, but Karl is always cursing me, saying, I wanted to put you up for this, but you're not free. You're too busy fight directing. And I was like, what is it? And he was like, doesn't matter.
So what about social media? Are you big on social media?
Do you know what? I've got better at it. I have got better at it. I'm on Twitter, which is at Kaitlin J Howard, and that's mostly, I think, there's the odd time where my personal opinion on things leak out, but most
politics.
Occasionally, I do remember challenging one of the ministers during COVID to a sword fight when he said that the industry wasn't viable, which was a bit tongue in cheek, but I was quite cross at the time, so occasionally it does leak out, but mostly it's just to kind of let people know what I'm up to and kind of share.
Which one do you prefer? Instagram, Twitter, Facebook?
So I think, do you know what? I actually think they all have really specific things that they can achieve. So to have a spread across different things. I've not gone on to TikTok yet. I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. I think it's a bit much for me, I think.
Me too.
Yes.
I just see it as being a waste of time. But...
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say... Well, I don't know. I'm sure it does have its uses, but I think I'm happy coping with what I've got already. But I think...
LinkedIn?
Do you know what? I've been on LinkedIn for a very, very long time, but I've personally not found that many helpful connections in terms of getting jobs. I think it's great for business. I think it's a much better tool for that. But for the creative arts, I think it's kind of I don't know, I found it to be a little bit of a business-oriented Facebook, if that makes sense. People connect to you, but I've not personally had any experience of things coming from it. Whereas Twitter, I find fantastic to connect to people.
Especially politicians.
Especially politicians that you want to challenge to a duel. And I remember several times just kind of having these random things pop up in my direct message inbox on Twitter, sort of saying, oh, we're looking for a fight director for this, or we're looking for this, or we're looking for that. And things have come from it. So Twitter, I find a fantastic tool to know what's going on in the industry, connecting to people within the industry, letting people know what you're doing. Instagram, I love Instagram. Instagram, I think I've got like 50 different accounts on Instagram now. I've got a couple of different ones, and I've found that way easier than trying to put photographs and video content on my website. It's just a much quicker way, and it's guaranteed to hit an audience. Whereas with my website, people have actually got to be looking for my website. Whereas Instagram, it kind of just pops up. And I just love, I can post things on there dead easy, dead quick in terms of production stills, rehearsal shots, videos of what I've been up to.
So you've got quite a good grasp of them all, haven't you? You realise that they are for different audiences and they will achieve different things.
I'm not very good at, the on Instagram, when you do a story that's only there for a short amount of time, and where you get the coloured ring around your face and on your icon and that, I'm not very good at that, because I find that by the time I've spent ages composing it and putting the words on it and doing this and making sure that it's all done correctly and posting it, then for me the interest in that moment has passed. I much prefer just having. And also, it's not there forever. It's only there a short amount of time. So
why put all that effort into it?
Exactly. Yeah. As I said, referring back to me being lazy before, it's like, just quickly post it and then I'm done. And so I just prefer having my feed with it all on, and it's quite a nice thing to be able to refer people to. I found that recently, in the last few years, because of the penchant for self-tapes and kind of quick. People want to see for themselves what you do rather than taking your word for it. So it's dead easy for me to say, if somebody says, are there any videos of your work that we can look at? Especially if I'm approaching somebody to say, I'm local to you, I'd love to work at your theatre, or I'd love to work with you personally. I can say, if you want to see what I'm capable of, then here's my Instagram.
So what other methods do you use to network? Do you network?
Do you know what? It's a funny thing, networking for me. I've had varied success with it over the years. And actually, I know I'm kind of being quite open and talkative now. But in social situations, I sometimes find it really...
No way are you shy.
I'm not shy. I'm not shy, but I find the hard sell quite difficult. I find just walking up to somebody and saying, hi, I'm Kaitlin, I want to work with you, really difficult. I would much rather... I don't even really like talking to people on the phone that much. I really don't. If somebody rings me, I have... and it's a number I don't recognise, I'm like, if they'll leave me a message and I'll get back to them.
I'm dreading to think what you thought with mine. No. I got in touch with you.
No. But I think that for me personally, I think it's to do with that thing as an actor. The thought of rejection is a big thing for actors. That thing of realising that actually, if you didn't get the job, it's not necessarily because of you, which I'm better with now. Whereas for me, sometimes it's, am I bothering them? Oh, they're busy. Oh, okay, I'll send them an email because then they can deal with it in their own time. And okay, then they've got all the information so I find networking in person quite difficult, but then networking in terms of contacting people, I find quite easy. I'm a good email writer. I'm good at that. And so networking for me is a kind of poison chalice a little bit. I'm a bit like, I don't know how I feel about this. Okay, but I know I've got to do it. So I tend to. Most of my success has come from sending out a big blanket of emails to all the different theatres when I first became qualified as an equity registered fight director, and then slowly making those connections. And I have found the biggest and best form of networking is be good at what you do, and good work leads to good work. And if people like you, they'll employ you again. And if you did your job well, people will employ you again or recommend you. So it's been, I think I've written to a couple of theatres recently that I'm still kind of really interested in working in. But mostly the entire of last year came from directors I'd worked with before or theatres I'd worked at before wanting to use me again, which is fantastic. Or other fight directors just not being available and rating you enough to recommend you, and that's always, it's always a bit tricky, because then if they then come back to you, you kind of I feel really bad, because I'm kind of like, I only got that because you weren't available that one time.
So if you was to give someone advice, someone that wants to break into the industry, either as an actor or as a combat instructor or anything like, what advice would you give to them besides find their inner Helen Mirren?
So I would say, I was asked this question recently, actually, by, I actually went back to my secondary school and had a chat with their students who were doing A-level. And I would say, don't be fixed on one idea of what you're going to achieve, because I thought I was going to be the next Emma Thompson, and I've turned out to not be the next Emma Thompson at all, you know. Emma Thompson can only be Emma Thompson. So don't have a fixed idea, and don't be afraid to divert off that path if you need to, or if you suddenly want to. You know, I know lots of people who've just stuck at the same thing because they don't know how to, or they're scared to do anything else. Whereas the industry now is getting far better at not pigeonholing people. It used to be that you would get put in one box, and that was all people thought you could do. Whereas now, I hope I've been able to show a little bit today that that's not the case nowadays. You know, you can be more than one thing, and it's okay not to know exactly what that is yet, because I certainly, when I was leaving drama school, did not think that I would be teaching stage combat in a drama school. I did not think I would be an equity registered fight director. I did not think that I would be now interested in intimacy coordination or directing or teaching or, you know, all these different things. I honestly thought that I was just going to act. And the fact that my life hasn't ended up like that is so exciting. It's brilliant to not have to just do one thing. There are certain things that I don't get to do for a long time, which then I end up missing. But then when you do get to do them again, it makes it even more special. So it's kind of, I would say, don't be afraid to try anything, basically. That's my biggest joy in what I do.
Has there been any advice that you've been given that you thought, yeah, I'm going to use that? Or
yeah, there's always lots of things. That I think the biggest piece of advice that I was given, which I then ended up kind of ignoring, was you're going to have to choose. And I was a student stage combat person. I was training to be a teacher, and I was absolutely adamant that I could be an actor and a fight director and all these different things. And these were two gentlemen who were older and sort of from an industry that is probably now not dead, but from a older style of industry where people are not going to be able to accept that you can do more than one thing, so you're going to have to choose. And I remember my response being, why? Because I can do both. And they said, well, the industry will not let you. And I'm really proud to say that I ignored them, and I didn't do that. So in terms of big pieces of advice that I ignored, then that's the thing that I can always remember. It's like, no, I don't know. I don't have to choose. Things will come and go, but I'm still paying my bills. And then I suppose in terms of advice that I kind of hold to is just advice that I gave myself, that actually I can. You know, like so many people kind of doubt themselves, but that phrase for me is really important. Actually, I can. And it's kind of something that I say to my students quite a lot as well, is that when they're like, no, I can't, I'm fine, no, this is too hard. It's like, well, actually you can if you just have a bit of faith. So that's a big mantra for me. I've got a T-shirt with it on. Actually, I can.
I can imagine a T-shirt for you is, I've mastered the Edinburgh Fringe.
Ah, yeah. It's bonkers. I've been up there actually when the festival isn't on. And the thing that suddenly strikes you about Edinburgh is how easy it is to walk across it when nobody's there. It takes forever when the Fringe is on, but suddenly you're like, oh, this is really quick. to get from here to here.
We're coming towards the end of the podcast now, but I was wondering if you could tell us about your monologue showreel service.
Oh, yeah. So this is something that I kind of dabbled in during lockdown, and it's been going quite well. So I branched out a little bit just before the pandemic in terms of going into directing, because they're all transferable skills. So I was lucky enough to get to direct a play at the Cambridge Shakespeare Festival. And it was so much fun. And I kind of thought, okay, well, it's in terms of fight directing and acting, and, it's all understanding the motivations of characters. And I'm chatty enough to be able to hopefully guide people into an overall sort of thing. And my other half was looking for some showreel material. So he asked me if I would help him film a couple of monologues. So he did a piece from Love and Understanding, which is a modern piece.
So your other half's an actor as well?
He is, yes, he is. And then he did one of Banquo's speeches from the Scottish play. And we just kind of were messing around with framing it and sort of things like that. And something that we kind of noticed was that I kind of was able to frame things nicely and kind of give him enough to think about through it and kind of direct him. So what I was doing with the showreel monologue service was that if people had monologues that they wanted to film, then they could come to me, we'd discuss what they wanted to achieve from it, and then we would find a scenario for it and set them up. And I took one girl out to some woods where she did a speech from As You Like It, storming through this forest.
That sounds good, yeah.
I know, it does sound...
her personal space first.
No, it was fine. It was absolutely fine. She was just kind of... It was to camera, and it ended with her kind of getting frustrated with the recipient of the speech and kind of throwing a punch and me falling down as though she'd hit me, and it kind of looked really quirky. And
I think we have that on video, don't we?
Yes, I think it's on my website.
It'll be on the screen now.
Yes, and it was a lot of fun to film, and I just kind of really enjoyed working with actors in that respect, in terms of it's a quick and easy thing to do. I've got quite a filmic imagination, so in terms of, okay, let's take this speech and put it in that context and see what that does to it. So, for example, my other half's speech from Banquo.
Should we give a shout out to your other half?
Oh, yes, he's called Gareth Llewellyn.
Hi,
yes, and he's a brilliant acting teacher as well, and an actor. He's fantastic. But yeah, we set it in... we waited till it was dark. We put the sort of log burner on in the back garden, and we got him to sit close enough so that he was lit by the fire, and it made it really intimate and moody and kind of thoughtful, and he was really kind of churning over everything that had been happening and delivering this speech, and it kind of came out really, really well. So I've kind of been working with... I've done about 4 or 5 of them now, and they've come across really, really well.
Excellent. So where are you going to go? What do you want to do in the next few years?
I don't know. Oh, crikey. I don't know. I mean, weirdly, I used to have this bucket list of stuff that I wanted to achieve. I kind of got distracted by other shiny things, so that, and things that I have achieved. I'd always loved to do more acting, and the joyous thing about this industry, I suppose, is that there's no fixed time at which you should retire. So I can always act. I can always do these things as I get older. And I suppose for me, I've reached that time where there aren't... I know it's a bit cliche to say, but it is true. Like there's an age range for women where parts dry up a little bit. So there's a range where, you go through stages. There's lots of parts for people below this age, then this is a bit sparse, and then suddenly once you're older, there's lots of parts again. So I'm kind of in that range. So while I'm waiting, I'm filling it with all this other stuff, which physically I might not be able to do by the time I'm 60. My knees might have given up by then. So then I can go back to the other stuff. But, in terms of my bucket list, I a big one that I had on there was working at the RSC, which actually I'm getting to do this year, which is amazing.
Excellent.
So I'm going to be doing some fights for one of their shows later in the year, which is amazing. So then I suppose it's just kind of hopefully working there again, and then maybe again, and doing that. I'd love to do some work in London. You know, the National is a big thing on my list that I'd love to work there, and I'd love to work in the West End doing some stuff. But again, I've kind of become more sated, more satisfied, and you know, I've kind of reached that age where what will be, you know, and things will always happen.
Are you mellowing?
I think so. There's the odd thing that I still get fiery about sometimes that rile me a bit, but
You're talking about Twitter again.
well, no, not necessarily Twitter, but just, you know, I'm a big advocate for how people are treated within the industry, and just making sure that, you know, that gone are the days when people should be able to take the mick, and if somebody has been treated incorrectly, then it needs to be rectified, you know. And I'm quite a big advocate of don't mess people about. You know, it's important that you are honest, and that then somebody can be honest in return, and you know, and don't be messing people about, because this industry is difficult enough without that as well, you know. And just it being a fairer industry, which it is becoming. It's becoming a much nicer industry to be in as I get older. And the practices of sort of the industry from the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s are kind of disappearing now, which is great as more people become more accepting and more tolerant of other things. You know, it's important that we are a welcoming industry and a warm one, which mostly we are, which is good.
So, who would you like to hear on the next podcast? If you could arrange,
if I
someone...
could arrange anybody, crikey, I don't know. There's several directors and creatives who I really rate, who I just think are amazing. I think, you know, obviously Chris Lawson at Oldham deserves a big shout out, because he's just an amazing human being. And then you've got people who run theatres like Simon Naylor at 53.2 in Manchester. You know, he's a very interesting chap and has got lots of stories to tell. But then, you know, there's choreographers I've worked with, like Bev Edwards. She's awesome. There's movement specialists. There's all sorts of people I could name. But if I could have any wish at all, I think Pedro Pascal would be amazing. But I'll leave that with you.
You've given me a lot to get on with, then I'll let you know. Right, Kaitlin, well, that's great. I'm going to put all your links down below.
Absolutely.
So that people can get in touch with you for whatever they may need, because you offer so much.
Thank you.
And I'd just like to say thank you for coming.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been amazing.
Great. Thank you, Kaitlin.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching and listening to the Entertainment Video Podcast. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe to my channel, and let me know who you would like to see in a future Entertainment Video Podcast.